the number one human problem to solve is capital. And that's what fintech is about.
Welcome to the Mamma Africa show. We are here with Lina Kacyem from Launch Africa, a venture capital firm, one of the most active in Africa, in the continent. She is the investment manager, also the co-founder of the Yale Africa Startup Review. Thank you for joining, Lina. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. Such a pleasure and such an honor.
Maybe we could start with your personal story of how you came to work at Launch Africa.
I am originally from Cameroon, and I was born in the States, but I grew up in Cameroon, and it's sort of a full circle to get to work in the ecosystem now. When I joined Launch, my father reminded me of a story I said when I was little. So, like many African kids not many, I was privileged to have parents who got to a certain level in life. And so, which means that people will come to them for capital to start their businesses. My dad was a banker at the time and my mom was in insurance. So it's funny because I grew up with people coming to my parents and be like, I want to start a business, and hearing them ask the questions. And I told my dad that I wanted to be so rich that I could just invest in people. So when I told him about this job, he was like, he reminded me of that story. So it was dormant for a while, but I really did my studies initially undergrad at Penn State in economics and marketing. And I went to work in insurance, really great training ground. So it taught me really how to rely on data, push my analysis skills, because the world of insurance is it's the law of large numbers. You have to base everything on historical data before making future decisions. So it was a really good ground, for my career. Then, I got to a point where it was time to decide what I wanted to really do when I grow up. And I got haunted with the idea of how do I go back on the continent? What do I do? I didn't necessarily want to do philanthropy, so investment became the route, and that's how I started immersing myself. I went back to school at Yale for my MBA, and that's where I co-launched the Yale Africa Startup Review, because the idea was, it was clear that the ecosystem was growing. It was time to recognize Africa's place in terms of innovation and tech, and understanding that we have such a young population, so they will be the one who will carry, right? You would hear terms like leapfrogging. My grandma never had landline, but she has a cell phone, right? My grandma never had a bank account, but she can transfer money, right? So there was clearly something finally happening on the continent where you could hang on to and go, we don't have to go through every single struggle that, let's say, the Western world or even Asia or Latin America went through. We can sort of leapfrog and design our own tech development. So I decided to really get myself into it. And through the publication of the Yasser every year, the idea was also, how do we pull out stories, pieces that are not usually spoken about? Because when you talk about tech and ecosystem on the continent, we have what we call the big four. They usually take anywhere from 75% to 85% of the investment. So Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya. So I started pushing against a little bit that, because I was like, if truly talent is equally distributed in the world, that also means on the continent. So there must be innovation happening in places other than those big four. So part of my role was really to pull from the Francophone, a bit of the Lusophone, for the publication. And little by little, making cold emails, a lot of cold emails, a lot of cold outreach. Some of them even to the Launch Africa team back then, Uwem, Zach, that I reached out to, Hannah, and I got to really learn from them, taking classes, talking to them, even myself working with entrepreneurs, because by that time I already had a decade of experience, at least in operations, so I could help entrepreneurs think through some of their challenges. So I made sort of my switch into that. And specifically, I've started to really look at the Francophone regions. I'm fluent in French. So it's helpful because the founders can pitch in French and not feel obligated that they have to speak the English way or the American way, so to speak. And also truly understanding these ecosystem on the Francophone side, because the culture is definitely very different. So that's my story. And I've returned on the continent, not in Cameroon, but I'm in Côte d'Ivoire. I'm based in Abidjan most of the year. I still do the back and forth with New York a bit, but Abidjan is new home.
Launch Africa is quite sophisticated. They work closely with Y Combinator, and they're in the core, of the heart of startups, like what a real startup is.
Yes. So part of our requirement, and one thing I forgot to mention, earlier, I co-launched as well an angel syndicate, actually to push the diaspora and the friends of Africa to invest in African startups. Because I had friends and people from the diaspora being like, we have no visibility. And I was like, okay, I'm moving. I'm going to see the startup. So I'm, even if because the ecosystem goes from family and friends, angel, VC, so having that pocket of money available early on in the ecosystem is very important, which joins part of, what Launch is trying to do, right? We focus on the early stage, and part of that early stage is to work with incubators, accelerators, ecosystem builders, because at least the founders or the founding team not only will get some of the technical skill that they may not have, but a lot of the structure around their project, right? Most founders, they have an idea, they saw a problem, they're really good at thinking, this is how I'm going to solve that problem. But the question beyond it is, will someone pay you to solve that problem, especially on the continent, right? People have to really think about how to spend their money, whether it's the end customer or like small businesses. So it's really the incubators, the accelerators, the ecosystem builders. Their job is to do that, is to help them think through not just the tech piece, but also think through the business side, and how to change customers' mentality so that they can be, so that the customer may be more willing not only to use the product or the service, but also to pay for it on a continuous basis. So that's why we actually focus on really having good relationships with the different incubators, accelerators, whether it's on the continent or abroad.
Africa in general faces so many specific challenges, like each country with its own challenges. And I think like Launch Africa is really prepared for kind of any scenario, it feels like. It's a totally different mindset than any, I think, other form of business.
To your sentence of Launch being able to be prepared, I think that's also what it's like to have an African VC fund run by an African team, right? And scattered through the continent. Cause the team is made of people who have been in the ecosystem, been on the continent. I'm literally the person who has been the most removed, from the continent. Whether it's Zach with Startup Bootcamp, one of, the first on the continent. He's been at it on the continent for the past, 20 years. You have Janaid, who's run 4 other funds before this one, worked also for the AFBD before. Like, he's been on the continent finding funding, figuring out the different ways. OM has experience from, the Tony Elumelu Foundation, Ingressive Capital. Michael has also been in the ecosystem between Ghana, Kenya, and Mauritius. Like, I'm just giving some example. Vuyo inside, like, you really have a team that they forged their knowledge, their expertise locally, right? And yes, the continent is 54 countries, but we've been able to figure out what are the similarities, what are the differences, and how do you get into getting to know the right people? Because one of the big characteristics of the firm as I joined them, because I was the last person to join the team, is the humility to get to know all of the people involved, like to really getting, whether it's Zach will go and meet like founders directly, right? Even when they are on within the portfolio already. Janaid will do the same thing, like that spirit of, you know what, we'll get our own hands dirty. Like the whole team is in it, which is also even our coverage model. Like we are all in it with the founder. And some of us have been founders as well. So understanding also like what they go through is really what makes this particular team unique. And I had to do a lot of research and talking to different people when I was making the jump to come back. So you're right. They've seen or we've seen so many different scenarios from so many different countries.
I always thought, oh, Africa is a difficult continent because of the language barriers and so many different languages. And then I realized like, oh, wait, no, there are only like 3 functioning languages in business across the whole continent, as opposed to Europe, which has multiple languages in a small concentration. And that's really interesting to me. And I think that's a huge advantage, is it not?
Yeah, it's a major advantage. And it's not only major because I guess it's only 3, so to speak, but it's the other big advantage on the continent is that you will see that founders speak at least 2 languages, 2 of those, very typically. Some of them even all 3. So I will say French, English, and Arabic. And I can't tell you the number of founders that I've from the northern part of the continent, for sure. I've met multiple who were familiar with like all 3. But then throughout the continent, you will meet founders who speak 2. So typically from the Anglophone side, they will speak only English because that's at the end of the day the number 1 business language all over the world. But your Francophone founders will also push themselves and learn English. And then the Northern will speak English and Arabic or all 3 sometimes. So yeah, it does help that it's quote unquote only these 3. But many Africans are used to speaking multiple languages ways, whether it's their mother tongue or, some of the more business languages. So that helps.
In your context, how would you describe how innovation looks in Africa at this point?
The way innovation looks is people seeing opportunities in their problems, right? That's really what it's about. It's okay. We, before we started recording, we talked about some of the leapfrogging, right? Where I said, my grandma never had a landline, but she has a cell phone. Why she has a cell phone? Because she needs to be reachable, right? We had a generation of parents who both parents started working more like, white collar jobs, if you will. So with the travels and everything, it's like, I need to be able to reach family members. So we are going, how do we solve that problem? Oh, there's that technology somewhere, we may not have all the infrastructure, but we will always figure out how to leverage some innovation maybe that has been created somewhere else and make it better or adapt it. Or something altogether very that's quite new. So everyone knows the story of mobile money, right? Mobile money for us was because everything was cash. It's not safe to carry cash, but we all have this thing in our hand, a cell phone. So why not use it to be able to send money to each other without having to have a bank account? Because no one wants to go and sit and open a bank account and line up behind the ATM if it works, if it doesn't work. So that's how innovation works on the continent. The comparison that I sometimes make compared to my life in the US is innovation in the US is I feel like sometimes, and maybe I'm reducing, this is kind of thing. In the US, it feels like it's like, let me create something fun. Let me create something that's just, going to make life more exciting, right? And at least for the white male founders, right? Which is very different if you are in the minority in the US. That their experience is much more related to the African entrepreneur, which is, oh, I see this pervasive problem. I keep hearing about this thing. So I'm going to go sit down and figure out how can we do it without being depending on government. Because that's the last sort of layer of our innovation. We cannot rely on governmental safety nets on the continent, right? So you really have to think about building a whole vertical, and also going around whatever limitation the government in place may have put in place, or may not have been able to sort of facilitate yet.
I think you described the difference so well between American and African startups. When you look at the founding teams, how strong are they in their technical skills, or what usual backgrounds do they have? How do you analyze a team?
Yeah, so let me start with giving you what the sort of like the ideal team looks like, right? First, it is typically better to have a team than a solo founder. Sometimes you have a solo founder that has everything, and that's great. But even with that solo founder, what we look at is what's the team that solo founder has been able to build around them, right? Because they may have the business and the technical, but it's like, okay, do you know how to hire people? That's really important on the early stage. Do you know how to sell the product, right? You may have the business mind, but you didn't get to know how to sell. So you look at who they've been able to bring around them as far as the team and the advisors that they have, right? They may not have a formal board of director, but who's their board of director, the advisor. So you look at those two a lot more closely when you're looking at a solo founder. But ideally you want a team. Diversity of thought is very important. Tech skill, critical, obviously. And it's not just about the building the solution, but it's even thinking about what's possible in terms of the technology out there. Are they up to speed with what's available out there? And it's not just slapping AI on everything and thinking, but do you really get the technology, the tech piece of what you're trying to build? Then there's the business side, right? Business is I'll put it in sort of two pieces: the business of selling your product, and then the business of running a business, right? The accounting. The people neglect that. The governance. Oh my gosh, the governance. Do you have the right accreditation from, the government, the licensing? Did you set up the company properly? Whether it's locally and the subsidiary locally and the holding one abroad. Did you do that properly? Did you set it up well with all the different parties involved? When you got business angel, did you have the right contracts and the right partnerships? All of that matters. And then I will say it's great when they have the legacy knowledge. So meaning, let's say you're talking about logistics, and yes, you want to bring tech to solve this and that problem. But up until now, how do people actually solve their problem? Because having that legacy knowledge helps you figure it out what the customer is willing to buy, what behavior the customers will be more likely to change, right? Because when you offer a new product, a new service, you're changing how people or your customers are doing business. So if you have the legacy knowledge, you can understand which part of the value chain is enough of a pain point that your customer will be triggered to change how they normally do things. So those really have those three pillars within the founding team is extremely important. Then at the human level, we do ask those questions to the founders. I like to ask those, and sometimes they're a little bit like, I wasn't asked this, but understanding who they are as a person. Why do you want to do this? You're smart enough. You could have a better job, have a stable income. Why do you want to do this? On the hard days, what's your mechanism? Who is there how do you pick yourself back up? Having those questions, in your team. If I ask your team, what will they say is annoying about you? Like these type of questions so that I get to know who is in front of me, also challenging their thought process. Sometimes I challenge out of figuring out their thought, how they will answer it. Is it defensiveness? Is it, oh no, I've thought about this? Or is there also some humility of, I've thought about it this way, but I didn't think about it the way you're phrasing it. And that needs, a bit more time. So in the founding, you have those sort of like hard skills, if you will, the legacy knowledge, the business, the tech, but also like the soft skills is extremely important. Who person, how have you been able to surround yourself? Who is around you and why?
I find it interesting that African startups tend to get like less funding in terms of the value of the funding than American or others. And could you just address like why is that? And because it doesn't feel like one idea is necessarily so much more innovative than another. Maybe we address different challenges, maybe on a smaller scale or it's more context specific, but is that the reason?
There's a couple of things. There's perception and there's reality. I think we all know the perception of risk that is on the continent. There is risk on the continent, but the perception is higher than really what it is. And then there's some realities, right? Some of the realities are, one, where is the money, right? I really equate the African founders with sort of like the African American founder or the Latino founder in the US, in that who has the money to fund? People will go and fund, the number of times. And, I went to an Ivy League school, but I remember hearing, I'll fund you because, you went to Yale like me, or you went to Harvard like that sort of like the school and the network has validated you to get my check.
And it's still like that though, because on the really.
Yeah, it's still, humans, it's still like that, not necessarily out of being a nuisance or out of being bad, but humans like familiarity. Even those people who like to say they have an appetite for risk, they need to be familiar with things, right? So, which is why I also write these articles, because I want more people to be familiar with our continent, right? Because the more they read, the more they inform themselves, maybe some of that fear or that risk aversion will sort of thread away. But at the end of the day, there is that sense of, I will invest in who I can see myself, right? That's still why most of the funding goes to white men, because white men have most of the money. So they will invest in the younger white men, because the younger white man reminds them of themselves. They see themselves through them. It's like giving money to themselves. Right. So there's that sort of like behavioral piece of it. And then the continent is far as some of the American, LPs, potential LPs are concerned. So it's always one thing that would be interesting for you as you get more familiar with the continents, also to even see how, Asian LPs or Asian funds or, Asian investor behave towards the continent, right? Or even Europeans. Because the more familiar you are with something, the more you feel like you have some sense of control. Another piece of the reality is the jurisdiction, right? From where, if you are in Europe, in the Americas, or in Asia, you feel like you understand the recourses if something doesn't go well, which is again part of why I share about the regulations, right? It's for people to understand what the realities of our ecosystem. Even in the US, if you invest in sort of like early stage startup, you lose your money, But I think there's a sense of them feeling like, oh, if there's misuse of money, I can sue, or, I can seize, I have some sort of recourse. So teaching them, or I'm no expert because I also read from other experts. I talk to a lot of people, and trying to make it more digestible is helpful. So yeah, you do have the familiarity, you have the jurisdiction, you also have the lack of story, storytelling on the continent it's new, right? It's honestly, we started having stories during the pandemic, so that's only what, 5 years ago. We haven't been good at telling the stories in a balanced and nuanced way, which can be very difficult when you are viewed very negatively, right? Because you can go to the other extreme and romanticize things, which is not good. So really figuring out culturally for us, we're not very good at saying we're good. In our culture, in many African cultures, you don't speak of what you've done.
Yeah.
You let others speak of what you've done. But unfortunately, in the world that we are today, with globalization and everything, we have to be our own voice. We have to tell our own stories, or it would just always be distorted, right? And the only thing that will be remembered of us is the continuous suffering and blah, 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 So, I do think we do have a lot of work to do in telling our own stories, in making us more familiar to others. And also obviously push for local capital. That's another piece. I can understand a foreign investor going, why should I really invest on the continent when the fortunes on the continent are not themselves investing? Right. It's a fair question. We have to face that. So that's another piece that we also on the continent have to work really hard at. If we get more and more local capital into our ecosystem, obviously it will strengthen it. And it will make it more attractive. And the others will go, oh, wait, there seems to be something happening, on the continent. Yeah.
I guess if you just look at it pure like statistically, I know it's quite a new fund. What has the success rate been with the founders so far?
So we are currently on our second fund. Our first fund was a $36 million fund. As of March of this year, we had an IRR of 22.2%, MOIC of 1.9x, DPI of 0.1x. So it's pretty good. We are a retail fund, so we invested in 133 companies. I will have to confirm this with you so we can put an asterisk. But out of the 133, only about 10, somewhere around that number, that have closed. We've already also had some exits, some cash exits that we're continuing to work pretty well on those. On the second fund, in terms of numbers, it's a 75 million target fund that we are raising. We've invested in 22 companies so far. The IRR is 87.8%. So in terms of performance, doing pretty good. It's good. When you think of all the challenges on the continent, the fund has done really well, to the point that we're actually the first African fund that Harvard wrote a business case on us.
Fintech is the big one in Africa. Why is that?
It's the number one human problem to solve is capital, right? The number one thing you want to solve is move money from one place to the other. And that's what fintech is about, because we are a continent of many, 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 many currencies, but still doing business together, right? I remember reading a report like Nigeria and Cameroon do a lot of business together, but it's two different currency, and one of them, the CFA particularly, is not a true international currency, right? So you have to offer some solutions to SMEs who, an SME in Cameroon that has customers in Cameroon, in Gabon, in Equatorial Guinea, in Congo Brazza, like they need to be able to quickly exchange, right? And it's not people having cash in the car going from one country to the next. So that's the why fintech is still number one. Is at the end of the day, we still finding ways to resolve the problem of capital movement between individuals, and most importantly, between small businesses. So that's why you have fintech. Then you have logistics. Logistics is also taking more and more space, because logistics is the movement of goods. How can we easily track the movement of goods, even if it's by road or by train, but how do we effectively track it? Especially also as the exchange between many African countries and China has basically exploded, right? You have Chinese supplier. How do you make sure that from China to where you are on the continent, you can receive your good and then be able to deliver it to your own customers? So logistics at stake also some place. There's obviously health tech. Healthcare all over the world will continue. It's a big topic on the continent. What's also interesting that's increasing is around chronic diseases. There's the data piece, because there's not enough data on Black population in general, and definitely on African population, right? So there's a lot of startups around providing linking patients to doctors, to all types of medical providers, linking medical providers to be able to have the tools to work with, but also making sure that, they're gathering the right data to be able to properly advise and so on, leveraging AI, especially, to do that. But also what we're seeing is, as our population ages, right? Because the life expectancy continues to increase, thankfully. So as the population increases, and also the rate of diagnosis increases on certain diseases, there's a need to better understand the population or create solutions that will be more adapted to this population. The other one, obviously, that has exploded as well is anything around climate resilience, right? Whether it's in terms of e-mobility, agriculture, we have to feed ourselves, and we have to feed ourselves in a way that doesn't kill the earth. A lot of African farmers are already feeling it, that the soil has lost a lot of its nourishment. So what are the solutions, to be able to quickly measure the level of nourishment and adapt to the change of seasons, and also use sort of entrants, or engrais. I'm losing the word in English, but what are the technology available for the revival of the soil, or actually doing an agriculture that's not destructive but regenerative. And then I think the last one, education will, it stays. What are the solutions around education? So yeah, those are sort of like the big sector. E-commerce will sort of like continue to stay. Yeah.
What impact do you think these companies, these startups in Africa will have if we look at like the next 10, 20, 30 years? I know it's hard to imagine because so much has changed even in the past 5 years.
I mean, you named the first one, and it's part of my passion in this. It's the job creation, right? Not just startups themselves. I'm talking about think of this, sort of the gospel according to Lina, if you will. The best customers for our startups in a lot of our economies are SMEs. So if startups are there to bring innovation, right? Then let's say they won't have more than 40 employees, which still seems small, right? But what they will do, they will make doing business for SMEs better, faster, right? More efficient. More efficient means what? Means you can do more. You can offer more, meaning you will hire more. So it's not just the startup hiring, but it's also their customers hiring. That's the impact that I am seeing. Honestly, it's really around the job creation and the type of jobs as well, right? So when you're looking at tech, you're not looking at just any sort of job. There's a certain level of education that you need to have a tech job. So definitely job creation, financial inclusion is another one, right? The impact of startups, is, when I'm looking, for example, at, let's say Jamo, right, that I use here in Cote d'Ivoire, it has allowed me to have a virtual bank account, right? And a virtual Visa card. I also have the physical Visa card. What that means to me, let's say I'm not working at lunch, but I am an SME or whatnot, is I can buy things online easier, right? If you think about it, some people used to call somebody, have that person use their card. Like, think about all the risk that's involved in having to rely on a third party. You first have to be able to reach them, right? Then from reaching them, you give them the money, trusting that they will do the purchase as you want it. Like, so much complication in that sort of whole process. But now I have access to this virtual and physical Visa card, and I can make my purchase. Jamo allows me to use my card wherever I go. So I was in Morocco, and I got to a store where they were selling seeds, tomato seeds. There's a lot of talks about tomatoes from Morocco. And, I didn't have the local currency, but hey, I now have this card that Jamo has provided me, and I can buy. So there's job creation, this financial inclusion from, especially when you talk about women as well, that's a whole different topic as well. And then the digitalization of services. I was reading how I think it's Benin and then Togo that are also digitalizing, when you buy the whole process of buying land, right? So there will be startups now that can pop up in the real estate industry and facilitate even more that process for people who want to buy land. A couple of years ago, I bought some piece of land in Cameroon. My Lord, the process, right? So when you think about the impact of startups in the next 5 to 10 years, it's really that big, but it's not startups by themselves. I want to make sure that, it's startups as part of a whole ecosystem. It's with SMEs, it's with governmental changes in policies. They just that thing that can make things faster, because the startups are typically tech driven. So it's, the mechanism on how do you do more faster without using too many resources.
If you look now in the world, we're all using kind of the same services. Like when it comes to the physical technology, the devices we use, Google services, everything that we use is basically big tech American. But when it comes to autonomy and like using our own technologies, where do you see Africa in terms of technology? Like, do you think we'll ever be on the forefront of innovation?
Yeah, why not? I absolutely. I don't see, everything follows the la courbe de Gauss, so it may not be necessarily in you and I's time, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see these young people, what they're able to create with barely nothing, and I'm going, it's gonna happen. It might not be me, might not be my children seeing it, maybe it will be my grandchildren generation. But yes, absolutely. It's not like we've never been at the forefront of technology, so to speak, right? There used to be a time long, long, long ago when, Africa, I guess the time of the pyramids or whatnot. But I am someone who remains hopeful, especially because we are more and more challenging ourselves to build innovation that fits our reality, right? So that is incredibly important. And actually, if you think about it in some ways, right, M-Pesa came before Venmo and Zelle. Like, for us, using your cell phone to send money to each other, that was old news, right? Like, it was actually the US sort of catching up when Zelle and Venmo were invented, because most people were trying to have their app, or their bank app, or it was this thing where you can make a phone call or you could write a check, but Africans sending money via their cell phone, it's been done. And that was something that was at the forefront. I don't remember exactly the story, but I do remember it was like an interview. I think it was the founder of Lyft or something like that. He had done a trip to Zimbabwe, and that's sort of how he thought about Lyft, right? This idea that you hail a car of someone that you don't know and you share a ride with other people that you don't know to go from point A to point B. Right. So it hasn't happened that well. Again, the storytelling, but when M-Pesa became big on the continent, we didn't talk about M-Pesa. We didn't make it heard that, hey, we have this thing that all of y'all may want to have, so yes, will we be at the forefront? Absolutely. There will be plenty of opportunities for us to be at the forefront. It will be very challenging because competition is hard, but and unfortunately we have suffered brain drain, usually past a certain level. They tend to leave. That's so you almost have to think how many of the technology that we are using came from the brain of African children, African adult or African people who moved abroad and just built those technology, elsewhere, so because that's the reality as well.
There are no boundaries really when it comes to startups. It's just about what projects you like and you want to invest in. So how can people get involved if they're thinking about investing in one of the startups, or how does it actually work?
Okay. So depending on your level of funds available, there's sort of two solutions. You can invest in a fund like Launch Africa, and you can, connect with me about that. It's Lina at launchafrica.vc. So you can invest in our fund, and it allows you, wider diversification. And we, as a retail fund, a lot of our LPs are actually individuals. So that's one way to do it. Like I mentioned, I also have, run an angel syndicate for much smaller ticket. Nextmillennia.fund is the website, and you can get a hold of me at Lina at nextmillennia.fund. So, and on LinkedIn as well. So if you send me a connection request, just put a note that you are interested in investing in African startups, and we'll get in touch.
Well, thank you so much, Lina. I'm so happy to meet you. Another person at Launch Africa. Now I can actually see such a great team, a very strong team, and well done on all the success of your fund. I'm sure a lot of people will be reaching out to you. So thank you so much for being here on the Mamma Africa show.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.